That's all right. That's all right. It's good. It's good. So after the Buddha's awakening, he went to nearby where some ascetic companions of his had kind of settled, and he gave them his first couple of teachings on, the core of the Buddhist path, what he had awakened to. And then after that, he decided that he'd go back toward Bodh Gaya, which is where he became enlightened. And near there were a group of hermitages where there were more than 1,000 ascetics living. And these were, they're referred to as matted-haired hermits. Part of their thing was they didn't wash their hair or cut their hair or anything, so it got very fragrant. And they worshipped fire, so they did these fire things, and they did something that involved poisonous snakes too. So he decided that he would go and he would tell them what he had awakened to. And so he got there, and there were actually 3 of these hermitages, so 1,000 monks who were kind of followers of these 3 brothers, and they were kind of scattered around in different hermitages. So he went to the first one, the largest one. And he told the person in charge there, said, can I stay the night here? I'm a wandering ascetic. I'd like a place to stay. And so he recognized there was something about the Buddha, and he didn't feel real comfortable about it. So he said, sure, you can stay the night. And he offered him a room in this shed where they kept their poisonous snakes. And so the next morning, some of the other ascetics heard this, and so they rushed over to the shed thinking they're going to open this thing up and find this dead guy in there. And the Buddha's just sitting there in the midst of all these cobras and just meditating very peacefully, and was just perfectly fine. Well, this got their attention, and so they wanted to hear his teachings. And he said, okay, but let's go gather up the rest of your friends. If I'm going to talk, I might as well talk to all 1,000 of you at once. And so they went to this place where there was kind of a mountain-ish kind of thing. And so he got to the top of the mountain and looked down at these 1,000 ascetics and gave them a talk. And so they all worshiped fire. Every day they would do this fire puja, sort of fire ceremony. And so when he decided to talk to him, he thought, well, I'll just talk to him about fire. And so he delivered this talk that became known as the Fire Sermon. T.S. Eliot actually borrowed the title of this for a section of his poem, The Wasteland. Those of you who've studied English literature probably know who Eliot is. And The Wasteland was probably his most famous poem. It was considered one of the most important poems of the 20th century. And this particular section deals with coming to terms with mortality and using imagery from mythology and religion as well as local culture. And anyway, you didn't come here for a talk on English literature probably. But this is what the Buddha told these matted-haired, fire-worshipping hermits in the Aditta Parayaya Sutta. And I'm going to condense it a little bit in the interest of time, and then I'll go through and kind of unpack some of it. So he says, monks, all is burning. What do I mean when I say all is burning? I mean the eye is burning, forms are burning, consciousness is burning. Whatever arises dependent on contact at the eye, whether pleasurable, painful, or neither, that is also burning. Burning with what? Burning with passion, with anger, with delusion. Burning with birth, aging, and death. Burning with sorrows, lamentations, pains, distresses, and despairs. Likewise, the ear is burning and sounds are burning. The nose is burning and smells are burning. The tongue and flavors. The body is burning. Physical sensations are burning. The intellect is burning. Ideas are burning. Consciousness of the intellect is burning. And whatever arises in dependence on contact at the intellect, whether pleasurable, painful, or neither, that too is burning with the fire of passion, the fire of aversion, the fire of delusion, burning with birth, aging, and death, sorrows, lamentations, pains, distresses, and despairs. Seeing this clearly, one grows disenchanted with the eye and sights, with the ear and sounds, with the nose and aromas, with tastes, with sensations, with the intellect, with ideas, with whatever arises in dependence on the intellect. Disenchanted, one becomes dispassionate, non-clinging, and through that one is released. Birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. This is kind of fun to read, and I hope to hear. It's very poetic in kind of a heavy metal sort of way. In fact, as reading it reminds me a little bit of this old Iggy Pop song where the chorus is basically, I'm burning inside. Has that kind of vibe. But it contains a very important teaching in Buddhism about the relationship of clinging and suffering. There's another teaching on dependent origination that talks about this in a more technical and detailed way. But I like the fire sermon because of the poetry. Even if you don't quite understand what the Buddha is saying here, still kind of hits you on a little deeper level. But the idea that suffering results from clinging and that transcending suffering results from letting go is integral to Buddhist thought. But it's also one of the most confusing things in Buddhism, I think. People will often hear talk about non-attachment as a spiritual practice or as an objective in spiritual practice, and they'll worry that this means that they have to stop caring about things. But non-attachment doesn't mean emotional detachment, and I'll explain more about that as we go. So I want to just kind of talk about a few specific passages, and I'll unpack these a little bit. So he starts by saying, all is burning. Well, what does this mean? So to Indians in those days, fire was seen as a sort of agitation. It was hot because it was stirred up and unsettled. So to burn is painful. And he was transcending, so the object of asceticism was to transcend suffering, to transcend the cycle of coming and going and that kind of thing. And they were trying to do this by using fire. And so they were very familiar with that on a spiritual level, this idea of fire and suffering. And so this was kind of why he talked about that, why he used this particular metaphor. He says, what do I mean when I say all is burning? I mean the eye, forms, consciousness, whatever arises dependent on contact with the eye, pleasurable, painful, or neither, is burning. So he's introducing this idea that what we encounter through the senses, anything we encounter through the senses, is potentially stressful. As humans born into this form, it's inevitable that we're going to experience some difficulties. And so he's talking about the role that perception plays in the suffering that we experience. And he's introducing the way Buddhism talks about perception. So sight is the eye and form, but it's also contact. It's contact with the mind. So we talk about the sense doors in Buddhism. We talk about 6 sense doors. You usually think of 5. The 6th I'll talk about in a minute. But the eye and form. Light bounces off of Kevin and comes in through my eye, and I see that. And then the brain interprets that as Kevin. And, I like Kevin, so, hey, it's a good thing, right? Maybe light bounces off a snake, and I see the snake, and maybe I'm scared. But then I realize, oh, no, it's a harmless snake. And so I'm happy because, I don't like rodents. And, if I've got snakes around, you don't have rodents around, that kind of thing. So whatever arises dependent on contact can be pleasurable, painful, or neither, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And any of those things have the capacity to lead to suffering. So you see the flowers, there's a sense of pleasure. You see, I saw a bumper sticker on the way here that, kind of triggered something that arose in my mind that was really kind of unpleasant. And then maybe there's an awareness of a new person at work or something like that. And you don't know them yet. So there's a feeling, but it's kind of a neutral feeling. It's neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So then he says, burning with what? Burning with passion, anger, and delusion. So he's talking about the short term. He talks about 2 kinds of burning here. One is the short-term burning that arises as a result immediately with contact. So in the long term leading to rebirth, and with it the stress that comes from being born. And so the goal of asceticism was to transcend that cycle of coming and going. But he's also saying that what we encounter with the senses is potentially painful in this life and has the capacity to bring us back to suffering more, burning with passion, anger, and delusion. So these are mental factors that can arise in response to contact. Greed, attachment, anger, hatred, ignorance, misunderstanding. So passion, by the way, is kind of a confusing term. It doesn't mean caring strongly about something that you value. You know, I might say that I'm passionate about my Buddhist practice and I'm passionate about trying to teach the Dharma in a way that's helpful to people. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But passion, in the way the Buddha is talking about it, is that which traps the mind. It elevates something from a want to a need, from a preference to a must. It's hard to let go of. Anger, disliking more generally, judging something good or bad. I don't like this, so it must be bad. Taken to an extreme, that can become hatred. Delusion, not understanding what leads to stress and what leads to happiness. Thinking that something will make you happy when it really won't. Think about the difference between thirst and craving. You know, your body lets you know when you need water. That's thirst. You see an ad for your favorite brand of gin, and the mind says you need a martini. That's craving. Those are two different things. So in order to experience stress, there needs to be an awareness of something which comes through the senses. And so that's what he says when he talks about something that arises as a result of contact. And anything that comes in through the senses. The smell of fried chicken as we get close to lunchtime, for example. All right? Is pleasant, but yet there's a part of me that really wants to be over there, right? And so that's stressful. Something contact through the nose, contact through the ear, through the body, and so on. Anything that comes through the sense doors, but also things that come in through the mind. So you still have to have contact. A thought arises, you become aware of the thought, and that can lead to stress. But the important thing is contact. When we meditate, usually we cut off a lot of contact. Close your eyes, get in a quiet room, that sort of thing. So there's a minimal amount of contact, and the mind can be quiet. But also, you need to know what happened before you can get stressed out about it. Somebody might criticize you, but if you don't hear it, are you mad? This interesting thing happened at White Sands a couple years ago. Somebody came up and said, "Oh, someone wanted me to give this to you anonymously. It's a donation." So it was a card. Oh, that's nice, you know. So I opened the card, and there was a $20 bill in there, but there was also a note apologizing for that they had said something disparaging about me. Well, I didn't know they had said it. So there was no contact. Since there was no contact, I didn't feel about it one way or the other, right? But now there's contact. Now I'm reading about it. Oh, what'd you say this thing for? Thanks for the $20. But actually, you know, in reality, I don't really know what they said. They said they had disparaged me, so good enough, fine. I'm sure people disparage me. Somebody disparages me at least once a day, more than likely. And I was happy, though, that they had made the donation. Not because, you know, I needed the $20, but because they needed to let go of something. And that's the point of generosity. You directly experience the benefit of letting go of something, of not attaching to something. And when you do that, even if it's $20, that's still spiritually beneficial to you. The intellect is burning, ideas are burning, consciousness of the intellect and whatever arises dependent on contact at the intellect, pleasurable, painful, or neither, is burning with the fire of passion, of aversion, of delusion, with birth, aging, and death, sorrows, lamentations, pains, distresses, and despairs. So when we cling to sight, sounds, physical sensations, and even our own views, we set ourselves up for stress. So as I said, meditation is a good way to kind of work directly with this. The senses get to be pretty quiet, and so now we can focus on what arises in the mind, what's coming up in there. Memories, thoughts, ideas about what should and shouldn't be, all of those things. And when we notice them, then that's contact. It's contact between what has arisen and our awareness. And then we get to choose what to do in response to them. So if you don't cling to them, you don't create stress. If you stop clinging to things that cause suffering overall, then you stop creating stress in a big way. And he says, once you realize this, then you become disenchanted, dispassionate, non-clinging. And through that, one is released. Birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. So, in other words, on this sort of mundane day-to-day way, if I don't put my hand in the flame, I don't get burned. If I get burned and I don't cling to that fact, then I only experience a little pain instead of a lot of pain. If I beat up on myself about how stupid I was to put my hand in the flame, then I experience a lot more flame. And so how much clinging I do in the day-to-day life determines how much suffering I experience in day-to-day life. But if I want to transcend it altogether, he said, if you keep practicing that, then it won't bring you back to another life to experience suffering more. And what you get instead is nirvana. So this word nirvana means unbinding. It also means extinguishing, like putting out a flame. It's more a principle than a place or a practice. Literally, it means to put out a fire. The idea was that fire clung to its fuel, and it clung in this sort of agitated way, and so that created suffering. Well, if there's no fuel, there's nothing to cling to, there's no more suffering. And so when a thought arises about some harm done, if you don't attach to it, it doesn't fuel a 10-minute rumination about what you should have said in response. In day-to-day life, when you don't respond to what comes on and don't cling to it, then you don't come back to suffering again. And so this is what the Buddha was explaining. You do that and you're released. When the fuel burns up, the fire is freed. It's unbound. So what is this nirvana? I was asked this sometime in the last month or two. And I don't remember who asked it or where I was asked, so it might have been one of y'all. But somebody said, what is nirvana? Where is it a place? Is it a thing? What is it? The Buddha never really describes it. A monk once asked the Buddha for his position on this question. He said, where does an enlightened one go after death? And the Buddha replied that he doesn't have positions on that kind of thing. Yeah, this was argued a lot about by different spiritual teachers. And he said, I no longer have positions on that kind of stuff. The question doesn't apply. I said, what do you mean it doesn't apply? And the Buddha said, look, if a fire were burning in front of you, would you know that this fire is burning in front of me? And the monk said, well, sure I would. And suppose someone were to ask you, this fire is burning dependent on what? And the monk said, well, I would say it burns dependent on grass and timber and things like that as its fuel. And the Buddha said, well, if the fire were to go out, would you know that? The monk said, well, sure. Well, suppose someone were to ask you, the fire that has gone out, has it gone to the north, the south, the east, or the west? And the monk said, that doesn't apply. And he said, any fire burning dependent on grass and timber or other fuel, being unnourished from having consumed all of that and not being offered any other, is going to go out. The Buddha says, right, and it's the same with nirvana. There's not a place one goes. Freed from form, feeling, perception, ideas, and consciousness, the enlightened one is free from birth, death, aging, and suffering. So you don't have to worry about that too much. It's a lot better to practice with nirvana as a principle rather than as a concept. If you don't cling, if you do something else instead, whatever you can let go of whatever has arisen in your senses or in your mind and not cling to it, then you won't bring yourself back to suffering. And the Buddha described nirvana like this. He said, it doesn't matter whether it's a red lotus, a blue lotus, or a white lotus. Born in the water, they rise above the surface to stand with no water clinging to them. And in the same way, an enlightened person dwells with unrestricted awareness. So thank you for your attention.